Have you ever felt like, you're speaking English, but it's like walking through a minefield of words? Like you just can't quite get those words to flow together naturally.
It's so true.
It can be super frustrating.
It can.
But guess what? Today's deep dive is going to be your secret weapon to unlock that effortless fluency that we all crave.
Yeah.
And we're going to be diving deep into the world of collocations.
Yes.
And for this deep dive, we're going to be taking a deep dive into collocation in English.
Okay, great.
So have you ever heard of this thing called collocation before?
Oh, absolutely. It's like the secret sauce of sounding like native speaker.
It really is.
It's those little word pairings, that just make all the difference.
And the source that we're looking at today uses a really great example that I think illustrates this point beautifully. And it's the difference between heavy rain and big rain. Now, both of these phrases, technically, they describe like a downpour, right?
Right.
But there's something about heavy rain that just sounds so much more natural.
Yes.
Why is that?
It just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
It does.
And, the source actually explains this heavy in this context. It connects to the weight of the water. So you're not just like describing the rain, but you're almost feeling it, and that's the power of collocation.
Yeah.
It's not just about sounding native, it's about actually creating that vivid imagery and really connecting with the listener on a deeper level.
Absolutely. So it's not just about grammar.
Right.
It's about using these word pairings that really resonate with native speakers in a way that individual words just can't quite capture, right?
Yeah.
Precisely. And, using the wrong collocation, it can actually lead to confusion.
Oh, for sure.
And that defeats the whole purpose of communication.
Exactly.
Right.
Like, for example, if you say, like, I did a mistake instead of I made a mistake.
Yes,
It
exactly.
just sounds a little bit off.
It does. It does. And, the listener might still get your meaning.
Yeah.
But it can create this disconnect.
Right.
Because it's just not quite right.
And that's so interesting because even if, like, grammatically it's not necessarily incorrect,
Yeah.
it's more about, like, the natural flow of the language.
Exactly.
And I think that's what makes collocation so fascinating and also a little bit trippy.
Yeah.
If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to like the video. Share it with friends who might find it helpful. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next video. Let us know in the comments what topic you'd like to hear.
Definitely.
It's like this whole other layer of the language you have to kind of wrap your head around.
Absolutely. It's like you can know all the grammar rules, but if you're not using the right collocations, you're not going to sound natural and fluent.
It's so true. And you know what? This is making me rethink how I've been approaching learning new vocabulary.
Yeah.
Because I think in the past, I've been so focused on just memorizing individual words and their definitions.
Right, right.
But now I'm realizing that it's not enough.
It's not enough.
I need to understand how these words actually fit into the bigger picture of the English language,
Oh, absolutely. And that's where understanding the different types of collocations comes in.
Okay, so let's dive into some of these different types of collocations and kind of unpack what makes them tick.
Yes, let's do it.
All right, so one very common type of collocation is the verb noun collocation.
Okay.
And a classic example of this is take a break, which, let's be honest, we all need those from time to time.
Especially when we're learning a new language.
Especially when we're doing a deep dive into collocations.
Absolutely.
It could be a lot to take in, right?
It can.
But it's fascinating stuff.
It is. And those verb-noun collocations, they're everywhere.
They are everywhere.
Once you start noticing them, you'll see them all over the place.
And you start to realize, like, oh, that's why that sounds so natural.
Exactly.
Because it's not just the individual words, it's the way they come together.
It's like they're meant to be together.
They are. They're like the best of friends, these words.
They are. And they make beautiful phrases together. They do. Make a decision.
Yeah.
Do a decision. It just sounds strange, doesn't it?
It does. And, it's funny because sometimes you try to translate these collocations directly from your native language.
Yes.
And they just don't work.
They don't work at all.
And you're like, but why? Like, it means the same thing.
Exactly.
But it's all about that natural flow.
That's it. It's like you can't force it.
You can't.
It has to flow naturally.
Exactly. And that's what we're trying to tap into today.
Exactly. And as we go through these different types of collocations, I think you'll start to develop an ear for them.
I think so too.
And you'll be able to spot them in the wild, so to speak.
And speaking of spotting things in the wild, how do we train our ears to pick up on these collocations in everyday life? Because it's like they've been hiding in plain sight this whole time.
They have. It's like you've suddenly tuned into a different channel, right? Like you've always had the radio, but now you're finally hearing the music.
That's a great analogy. It's like all of a sudden these phrases are just going to start jumping out at you.
They are. You'll be like, oh my goodness, there's another collocation.
Exactly.
Hear everything.
It's like a secret code that's been unlocked.
It is.
Okay, so we were talking about verb-noun collocations.
Right.
But let's move on to another type, which is the noun collocation.
Okay.
And one that comes to mind and that our source actually mentions is round of applause.
Yes. A classic example.
Right. And again, it just sounds so much more complete and natural than just saying applause.
It does.
And it really captures that feeling of like a collective moment of appreciation.
It does. It's like you can almost hear the hands clapping.
Right?
It creates that sensory experience.
It does. And you know what else is interesting? The way that prepositions can totally change the meaning of a collocation.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, for example, interest in versus interest about.
Yes. Those little prepositions, they can really trip you up.
They really can.
Yeah.
Because you might think, oh, it's just a small word. It doesn't really matter.
Right.
But it can completely change the nuance of what you're trying to say.
Absolutely. And the source actually points this out, that using the wrong preposition
Yes.
can make you sound really unsure of yourself, even if your grammar is perfect.
It's like you're almost there,
Yes.
but you're just missing that, like, final piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. Like you're so close, but you're just not quite there.
And speaking of those little pieces of the puzzle, let's talk about adjective preposition collocations.
Oh, yes. Those are good ones.
Because those can be really tricky.
They can.
Like, for instance, good at versus good with.
Yes. Those are easy to mix up.
So easy to mix up. And again, they seem interchangeable,
Right.
but they actually convey these really subtle differences in like your skill level or your familiarity with something.
Exactly. And that's what's so fascinating about collocations, isn't it?
It is.
It's those little nuances that make all the difference.
They really do.
Okay, ready for another type?
Hit me with it.
All right, how about adverb adjective collocations?
Oh, yeah.
Like deeply concerned. That deeply, it just adds a whole other level, like intensity to the phrase.
It totally does. It's like saying, I'm concerned versus I am deeply and genuinely concerned about this.
Exactly. It shows that you're not just, brushing it off. It's
Wow.
something that you're really, truly concerned about.
It's like, I care about this.
Exactly. And that can make a big difference in how your message is received.
It's like, slightly annoyed versus deeply offended.
Exactly.
Those are two very different levels of annoyance.
They are.
And it all comes down to that one little adverb.
Exactly. It's amazing how much power those little words have.
It's true. And, another type of collocation that we haven't really touched on yet is the verb-adverb collocation.
Yes.
Like speak softly, for instance.
Oh, that's a good one.
Because, again, you could say speak quietly,
Right.
but it just doesn't have the same ring to it.
It does. Speak softly. Just feels so much more like gentle and intentional.
It does. And it creates a certain mood, doesn't it?
It does. It's like you're setting the scene with your words.
Exactly. And that's what makes collocation so powerful.
Wow, this deep dive is really making me realize how much I've been taking collocations for granted all these years.
It's eye-opening, isn't it?
It is. So knowing all of this, like how do we actually start to incorporate these collocations into our everyday English? Because it feels a little bit overwhelming, to be honest.
It can feel overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be.
Okay, good.
The key is to make it a habit, not a chore.
I like that.
Right. So instead of trying to memorize a million collocations overnight, which is impossible, by the way.
Yeah, probably not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. Trust me, I've
I
tried.
believe it. But the key is to just gradually incorporate them into your daily life.
So like, how do we actually do that?
So remember those flashcards we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Don't underestimate the power of flashcards.
Okay.
They can be really helpful for just like jotting down new collocations as you come across them.
So it's about actively like noticing them and writing them down.
Exactly. And then what you can do is maybe organize them by theme.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Right. So you've got like your verb noun collocations, your adjective noun collocations, and so on.
So you're basically creating like a personalized collocation toolbox.
Exactly. A toolbox that you can then draw from whenever you need it.
I love it. And it's not just about like memorizing those phrases. It's about training your brain to start thinking in terms of those natural word pairings.
Exactly. It's about developing that instinct. Yes.
Where you just like know which words sound right together.
Yeah, it just feels right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that brings us to another really powerful strategy, which is active listening.
Right. Because we talked about like noticing these collocations in our everyday lives.
Yes.
But it's about really paying attention
Facts.
to how native speakers are using these collocations naturally in their conversations.
Yes.
If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to like the video. Share it with friends who might find it helpful. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next video. Let us know in the comments what topic you'd like to hear.
And, it's not just conversations. It's also movies,
Oh, for sure.
podcasts, even songs.
Songs, absolutely.
Think about it. Music is full of collocations.
It is. It's true. And I think that's why sometimes, like when you try to translate song lyrics literally, they just sound so weird.
They sound so weird because you're breaking apart those natural collocations.
And what's interesting is that the source actually says that you can't learn collocations just by studying grammar rules. You need to actually hear them and see them in action.
It's so true. Like, you have to immerse yourself in the language
Exactly. You got to live and breathe it.
and let those natural word pairings just kind of seep into your brain.
Exactly. It's like, think of it like learning a new dance move, right?
Okay.
At first, it feels super awkward. You're like stepping on your partner's toes. You don't know what you're doing.
I've been there.
We've all been there. But then you practice it enough, and it's just like second nature.
Right.
You don't even have to think about the steps anymore.
It just flows.
It just flows. And that's what happens with collocations, too. The more you use them,
Yeah.
the more natural they'll become.
So it's like we're retraining our brains to think in these, like, chunks of language
Yes.
rather than just those individual words.
Exactly. And as you become more comfortable with these collocations, you'll notice that your speech just becomes so much smoother, more confident, more nuanced.
Yeah.
You're able to express yourself with like this precision and authenticity.
Yeah, and it's like you're not just speaking English anymore. You're like owning it.
Yes. You're putting your own personal spin on it
Exactly.
while still sounding completely natural.
It's that perfect balance.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly.
Like fluency meets personality.
It's a beautiful thing.
It is. This deep dive has been amazing.
It's been fun, hasn't it?
It has. It really has. And it's made me realize just how much power these like small shifts in word choice can have.
They really do. They can make or break your fluency.
Absolutely. So as we wrap things up here, I want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question.
Okay.
Think about a conversation that you had in English recently. Maybe it was at work, with a friend, or even just ordering a coffee.
Yeah.
How could you have used collocations to make your message even clearer, more engaging, or even just more authentically you? Keep exploring these natural word pairings and watch your fluency soar.